In the modern video game landscape, there are plenty of fun and popular games vying for your attention. Anything from Minecraft, to Elden Ring, to Genshin Impact, to Marvel Rivals. There's so many games out there right now begging for attention and time from gamers. Unfortunately, with all of those popular games taking the spotlight, plenty of fantastic games end up getting swept under the rug with only small but dedicated fan bases. And one of those games for me is a small game from a developer named Iron Oak Games, whom I had never heard of before. And the title of that game is For the King. Perhaps you've heard of it, but I had never heard of it until recently. So just about a week ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine, who we will call Ghost, I played D&D with him and another friend of mine, Wolf, and Wolf and I had never heard of For the King. So Ghost brought it up to us one day when the rest of the people in our D&D session were not able to make it because of Christmas festivities and whatnot. He wanted to see if we would play that with him instead. Since it was on sale for $4, we tried it, and it really surprised us. It was a lot of fun. So for those who might have never heard of For the King, it describes itself in the Steam summary as a strategic RPG that blends tabletop roguelike elements in a challenging adventure that spans the realms. Based on the number of reviews on the Steam page, thousands of people have enjoyed the game enough to leave a review, and that to the point of having a very positive status, which is rather uncommon. So it's pretty impressive. So a lot of people have enjoyed this game, but it seemed like it had fallen under the radar for, at least for me and some of my other friends. Like, I don't really see people talking about this game, and I don't recall ever seeing people talk about it that much. And so we booted up the game, and we started out our adventure building our characters, naming them. Well, we didn't really name them, we just used our usernames. So we started out in this little town called Orton for our little adventure, and gave us a warning before starting that the game might not necessarily be easy, but we were longtime gamers. We were playing on the easiest difficulty as well, so we'd surely be fine. Oh no.
Oh my.
They did not roll a single bad roll.
That is so
Get a single fail.
The question's failed.
Let's roll that back a bit. So, going back to the start of our journey, after starting out in Orton, Wolf and I set out learning all of the rules and gameplay while Ghost kind of guided us along the way since he had played the game before. So first, we learned how the movement works and the turn order and whatnot. So a bit like D&D, we each get individual turns with our characters, and the movement works rolling 5 dice, well, tokens really, determined based on the character's speed stat. So the chances of getting a successful flip of the token is determined on the character's speed stat at the beginning of your turn. So it can be anywhere from 2 to 5 tiles, which when I first started playing these tiles kind of looked like Settlers of Catan tiles. And so the speed stat connecting with the movement was our first introduction to the fascinating interconnectivity of the stats and dice, well, tokens, I keep forgetting, affecting all the actions you can take in the game. So although Wolf and I had no idea what we were doing at first, aside from the familiarity with D&D, we were both intrigued by the depth of the dice and stat mechanics implemented in the game. For example, Wolf chose a blacksmith class for his character, which is essentially For the King's version of a basic fighter. Unfortunately for him, the speed stat was a little bit lower than Ghost and I, so he was not able to move as far a lot of the time. However, he had other benefits, such as being able to taunt enemies or being able to negate damage sometimes, things like that. So Ghost and I used the Trapper and the Scholar classes respectively. So all of the classes in For the King have their own advantages and disadvantages. So they're a little different than the typical fantasy game classes. They're more like a bunch of lifestyle classes that got forced into adventuring. That's kind of what it feels like. So as mentioned before, Wolf chose the blacksmith class, which was essentially the fighter type class. Ghost chose a trapper, which was something he had to unlock from playing the game before. It's kind of a rogue type class, slightly different than the original hunter class that you can start with as like a rogue. It's a little more melee oriented, in my opinion, than the hunter class, and has different abilities. And then I chose the best class, the scholar class, so essentially a wizard. And so each of the classes fill their basic roles to an extent, but they're also not super limited to the typical archetypes that they fill. So they all have their own passives that benefit their playstyle. We'll get into all of that as we explain the mechanics later. For now, let's get back to the initial journey that we started on. So after leaving the starting town of Orton, Ghost led us into our first combat of the game against a beastman, I believe. And so as Wolf and I's first introduction to the combat system, we didn't fully catch all the depth to the combat right away. In fact, it probably took a few hours for us to really get the hang of it. Well, at least me, since I'm dumb as a rock. So let me give you the rundown in case you're as dumb as I am. Was that too fast for you? All right. Let me slow that down a little bit and show you how cool the combat in this game can be. To start with, the combat is semi-turn-based and mostly determined by the character's current speed stat. Then the character's turns are indicated at the top of the screen. And sure, many people don't like turn-based games like Pokemon or Final Fantasy. A lot of people aren't particularly fans of that style of combat, but the game does a lot of things to really spice that up. So it can be anything from like a 1v1 to a 3v3, depending where the characters and enemies are located on the map before the combat begins. So on each character's turn, they have a set of actions they can take determined by the weapon they are currently holding. For example, my Scholar character started with a basic tome weapon that gave me two main attack options. So one was a single target attack with higher damage and accuracy, and then the second was an area of effect attack that was slightly less accurate and powerful, but it would be able to hit all of the enemies on the screen. So when using the basic attack, the game would roll a certain number of tokens whose chance of success was determined by a stat indicated on them. To specify, my tome weapon was scaling off of the intelligence stat as seen by the brain on the tokens when attacking. Because the Scholar has higher intelligence, it is more accurate with weapons that use the intelligence for token rolls, whereas like the blacksmith would use strength, which is indicated by the arm that's flexing and things like that. And this particular mote of knowledge did not make itself known to me right away, but I am dumb as a rock in a sandstorm. Anyway, the number of successful token rolls then determines the damage you deal according to the max damage indicated by your wielded weapon. Then damage is also affected by the armor and resistance of the target. So armor reduces the incoming physical damage, and resistance decreases the incoming magic damage. So paying attention to those resistances as well as the turn order are, in my completely professional opinion, are two of the main aspects of the combat mechanics that you need to pay attention to. Another thing to consider during combat are the several status effects, resistances, and abilities that both enemies and allies can have. Immune to bleeding, immune to shock, immune to stun and daze. Some enemies might be immune to burning, others might be immune to stun, and worst of all are the enemies with high evasion who can only be hit by perfect attacks. Yeah, those are gross. we do not like those guys. Really annoying. On top of all that, there are elemental effects that can affect stats, There's curses with debilitating and semi-permanent stat reductions. Those can be removed by visiting a town healer or with certain items, but otherwise they are permanent. And then there are the most important aspect of all to pay attention to is the focus point system. So this is the most unique system in this game, in my opinion. So focus points are a limited power resource and probably the most unique mechanic, and it's widely utilized throughout all aspects of gameplay. In combat, focus points can be consumed to automatically succeed on 1 attack token per focus point spent. So this can come in clutch in critical combat scenarios, especially in cases where your character gets ambushed alone while traversing the map. Can happen, and it is really useful to have at least 1 successful roll in situations like that, especially for less accurate weapons. And then outside of combat, focus points can be used in another variety of ways. So one way to utilize them is to right-click during your character's turn to gain an extra token, an extra space of movement. And another way to use them outside combat is to guarantee a successful token flip during map scenarios when available, much like how it's used in combat for the successful attack rolls. At the end of all combat scenarios, Iron Oak Studios also added a unique reward mechanic that can allow you to share gold with your teammates, or you can pass on items to allow someone else to take it. So that comes in handy for inventory management and making sure everyone's geared up for future encounters and whatnot. So that requires some communication if you're playing multiplayer. Aside from combat and other encounters, the game has some very fun music and sound effects to add to the experience. Admittedly, there are a couple of sound effects that could have probably used a little bit more balancing and normalizing, but other than that, the sound effects of the game and the music fit the setting and scenarios very, very well. They don't really take away from the experience. They're not overly distracting. It's just a nice addition to the game overall. And then perhaps the only area where the game might be considered lacking is in the story. So it's very simple and straightforward. Essentially, the game's world is in danger of encroaching chaos, and random people, which is your characters, are requested by the widowed queen to save the country from the chaos. So it doesn't really break any new ground or anything. It could be seen as simple or even lacking by some, but in the end, it is a refreshing change from the numerous modern games that assault you with overly worded dialogue or cutscenes that way overstay their welcome. So although there isn't much of a story overall, what is there definitely gets the job done and allows the player to simply enjoy the gameplay to its fullest. So at the end of the day, Ghost Wolf and I are still currently playing through the final stage of the game and working toward the finale, so lucky you, no endgame spoilers from me. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my yapping about this fun little game, and hopefully you guys would enjoy the game as well. And maybe like the video and subscribe if you want more videos like this, and hope you all enjoyed watching, and I hope to see you again in the next one. Adios, fellow nerds.
The past, a scar that mars my soul, yet in prayer I find my plea. Use this vessel, though it's broken, to shine your light, to heal, to free.